4 years, everyone told you a boat was the smart buy, the safe splurge, the thing that holds its value. And for a while, it looked true. Then the market turned, and the same boats that sold for 200 grand started showing up half-sunk in mangroves, rotting against pilings, drifting into shipping channels with nobody at the wheel. In Florida alone, the state spent more than $9 million in a single year just dragging dead boats out of the water. The owners are gone. The bill isn't. And almost nobody is connecting why this is happening right now. If you own a boat today or you're thinking about buying one, this is the most useful 20 minutes you'll spend this year. Because what's happening on the water right now is a slow-motion economic event, and it tells you exactly where the value of your boat is heading. We're going to follow the whole chain, one link at a time, from the boom that started it to the abandoned hull rotting in a channel today. By the end, you'll know where you stand, and you'll know the one move that keeps you from being the next owner who walks away and gets a bill anyway. Let's start with the boom, because none of this makes sense without it. Back in 2020 and 2021, demand for boats went vertical. People were stuck at home, sitting on cash they couldn't spend on travel, and a boat looked like the perfect escape. Dealers couldn't keep them in stock. Used boats sold for more than new ones because nobody wanted to wait. Prices that had crept up for years suddenly jumped. And here's the thing about a boom like that. It doesn't create new demand out of thin air, it borrows it from the future. Every person who bought a boat in 2021 because they got bored is a person who was never going to buy one in 2024. The boom pulled years of buyers forward and packed them into 18 months. So when the world reopened and money got tight, the buyers didn't slow down. They vanished. And that's when the second link in the chain snapped. The boats people overpaid for during the boom didn't hold that value. They couldn't. A boat is one of the fastest depreciating things you can own. Drive a new one off the lot, and it can shed a fifth of its value before the first season is over. 5 years in, a lot of boats are worth half what the owner paid, sometimes less. That's normal. That's always been true. But when you stack pandemic-inflated purchase prices on top of normal depreciation, you get owners who are deeply underwater on a boat that's now worth a fraction of the loan. And that's where the math starts turning ugly. Now, here's the part most people never think about until they're living it. The purchase price is the cheap part of owning a boat. A boat doesn't just sit there. It costs money every single month, whether you touch the water or not. Slip fees, insurance, winter storage, engine service, bottom paint. Add it up, and a mid-size boat can cost thousands a year just to exist, before fuel, before a single trip. Boat people have a grim joke about it. The two best days of boat ownership are the day you buy it and the day you sell it. The problem in 2026 is the second day, because for a growing number of owners, there is no good day to sell. Picture the trap. You bought a boat for $90,000 in 2021. Today, it's worth maybe $40,000, if you can find a buyer. And used inventory is everywhere, so buyers are picky. You still owe $60,000 on the loan, and it's costing you $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 a year just to keep it floating. You can't sell it for what you owe. You can't afford to keep feeding it. So what do? A lot of people are choosing a third option. They stop paying, they stop showing up, and eventually they just leave the boat where it sits. That's the quiet, cold decision behind every derelict hull in the country. Walking away isn't laziness, and it isn't always a storm. For a lot of owners, it's a calculation. It is genuinely cheaper to abandon the boat and disappear than to pay to keep it or pay to dispose of it properly. And once enough people run that same math, you don't have a few bad apples anymore, you have a wave. Now, storms do play their part, and they expose the same trap in fast motion. When a hurricane tears through, it scatters boats across mangroves, shorelines, and backyards. Owners are supposed to work with their insurance to recover or dispose of them. But a huge number of owners simply can't afford the recovery, or the boat wasn't worth enough to bother. So they file the paperwork to release ownership and let the boat become the public's problem. There are sailboats still wedged in the mangroves of the Florida Keys 5 years after the storm that put them there. 5 years. The storm was the trigger, but the reason they're still rotting is the same reason boats get abandoned on a calm, sunny day. Nobody with money is on the hook, so nobody moves fast. Now watch where that wave lands, because this is the part the boating industry doesn't put in the brochure. In Florida, the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission has been tracking nearly 900 derelict vessels dating back to 2020. 900 dead boats, scattered from the Keys to the Panhandle, clogging the Intracoastal Waterway and hundreds of tributaries. And the count is getting worse, not better. State officials said flat out in late 2025 that abandoned boats are piling up faster than they can remove them. One veteran salvage operator who's worked these waters for 2 decades said that within minutes of heading out, she can point to a sunken sailboat left behind when its owner simply walked away. In 2025 alone, Florida spent more than $9 million recovering abandoned boats. $9 million of public money prioritized by which wrecks are leaking the worst or blocking navigation because there isn't nearly enough to clear them all. And the state's own estimate to remove every derelict vessel in its waters runs between $10 and $20 million. That's the backlog. That's just the boats they already know about. But here's where it gets worse. Florida isn't even the most expensive case. Go to the other corner of the country, to Washington state, and the numbers turn from troubling to staggering. Washington's derelict vessel removal program has an active inventory of 300 abandoned or derelict vessels right now. In just over 20 years, it has pulled more than 1,200 boats out of the water. The Public Lands Commissioner there described it perfectly. They haul some out and recycle them, and new ones take their place. They're cleaning up a flood that never stops rising. And then there's the boat that explains the whole problem in one hull, the Pacific Producer. This was a nearly 80-year-old steel ship, 169 feet long, that drifted down an inlet near Tacoma 3 years ago and never left. Patched holes, streaks of rust. Far too big for the recreational channel it ended up in. The state took possession, then discovered it couldn't actually afford to destroy it. So the ship just sat at a marina, racking up nearly $300,000 in moorage, security, and pest control fees, while the state waited for the next budget cycle to free up money. The final destruction alone is expected to cost over $1 million and take a month. All in, by the time it's recycled and gone, that single vessel will have taken nearly 2 years and close to $5 million of public money to deal with. $5 million for one abandoned boat. Let me put that in perspective. That single ship eats up nearly 40% of the entire 2-year budget for Washington's removal program. One boat. Almost half the budget meant for hundreds. And if you think that's the ceiling, it isn't. Just across the river in Oregon, there's an abandoned vessel sitting in the Columbia right now that the state estimates would cost around $25 million to destroy. $25 million. Oregon doesn't have that kind of money, so the state's solution has been to bolt the doors shut to keep trespassers out and leave it where it sits. Think about what that actually means. The wreck is so expensive to deal with that the official plan is to do nothing and hope it holds. That's not a backlog anymore. That's surrender. And it's happening on a major American river, in plain sight, while the meter on the eventual cleanup keeps running. If you're finding this useful, take a second and subscribe. I break down where the money's really moving in the boat and marine market every week, the stuff dealers and brokers would rather you didn't piece together. It costs you nothing and it keeps you ahead of the next person who buys at the top. So let's pick the trail back up, because we've seen how much one boat costs. Now look at why the costs run so high and where every dollar actually comes from. Removing a derelict boat is brutal, slow, expensive work. Salvage operators in Florida put the typical cost somewhere between $400 and $800 per foot. Do the arithmetic on that. A modest 27-foot sailboat, the kind that turns up sunk in a back bay all the time, can cost $10,000 to $20,000 to remove. A bigger vessel runs far higher. One derelict barge that sat in a Tacoma waterway for more than 2 years cost $463,000 to haul out and dispose of. And in that case, like so many others, the owner had signed an agreement to remove it, then sold it to someone else who signed the same agreement, then also walked. 2 owners, 2 broken promises. One bill, paid by the public. And don't make the mistake of thinking this is just a couple of unlucky coastal states. This is a national problem, and the federal response tells you exactly how big it's gotten. In 2025, the NOAA Marine Debris Program and the Boat US Foundation announced nearly $7.5 million in federal funding for just 10 removal projects across the country, from Alaska to Maine. One single grant, $758,000, went to Maine to remove 5 abandoned boats, including a former sardine carrier, a 95-foot steel car ferry, and a Navy ship built in England during World War II. 5 boats, $750,000. And down in the Florida Keys, Monroe County alone removes an average of 75 derelict vessels every single year, paying contractors who competitively bid for each job. 75 a year in one county every year forever, that's the pace. New ones always take the place of the ones they haul out. And the bill isn't only money. There's an environmental flood underneath all of this that makes the urgency real. When a boat is abandoned and left to sink, it doesn't just disappear, it leaks. Fuel, oil, hydraulic fluid, and battery acid seep into the water, often without anyone reporting it. The oil spill response managers say the worst pollution they ever deal with comes from spills nobody calls in, and a quietly sinking derelict is exactly that. On top of the fuel, the boat itself breaks down into fiberglass shards and heavy metals that settle into the seabed and the shoreline, so a single abandoned hull isn't just an eyesore in a channel. It's a slow chemical leak in water that fishermen, swimmers, and entire local economies depend on. And it's a physical hazard too, which is the part that can hurt you directly. A half-sunk boat drifting in a navigation channel is a 30-foot fiberglass reef nobody charted. Hit one at speed in the dark, and you don't just lose your own boat, you can lose people. That's why removal programs triage the way they do, pulling the wrecks that block channels and shipping lanes first, because those are the ones that turn into a collision waiting to happen. The manager who's been left holding these problems put it plainly. They keep sprouting up in every corner of the waterways. You haul some out, and new ones take their place. It's less like cleaning up a mess and more like bailing out a boat that never stops taking on water. Now step back, because there's a layer to this that most people watching have no idea about. Not all of these abandoned boats started as somebody's weekend toy. Some of them started as government property. In the Pacific Northwest, investigators found that at least 37 of the derelict vessels choking Washington and Oregon waterways were formerly owned by the Navy, the Coast Guard, or another federal agency. The pattern works like this. The federal government decides an old ship no longer meets its needs. Instead of paying to destroy it, the government sells it off cheap through a surplus program. And cheap is the key word. The manager of Oregon's removal program pointed out that a 140-foot boat should cost more than $50,000, yet these surplus ships were going for a fraction of what they'd cost to scrap. That's the trap baked right in. When a massive steel vessel sells for less than the cost of destroying it, you've basically guaranteed the buyer will eventually abandon it because the math never made sense to begin with. A private buyer picks it up with big plans and a small budget, the plans fall apart, and the ship ends up abandoned in a public waterway. Then the state, not the federal government that sold it, gets stuck with the multi-million-dollar cleanup. Together, those former government vessels have already cost Washington and Oregon over $21 million to remove and destroy. The Navy, when asked why it doesn't just destroy its own ships, didn't explain. So the same machine repeats at every level. Whoever profits from selling the boat moves on, whoever's left holding it pays, and right at the bottom of that chain every single time is the public. By 2025, lawmakers finally started reacting, and this is where you need to pay close attention if you own a boat. Florida passed a bill that lets the state hold abandoned boat owners financially responsible for removal, with civil penalties that can run up to $50,000 for knowingly abandoning a derelict vessel. The governor signed a separate crackdown, raising penalties and creating a long-term anchoring permit program, starting in January 2026, that forces owners who want to park a boat in one spot for more than 30 days to register it. The idea is to catch the at-risk boats before they turn into wrecks by knowing who's sitting where. On paper, that sounds like the problem getting solved. In reality, the law arrives after the damage is done. Because here's the catch, nobody says out loud. The whole reason people abandon boats is that they have no money and no equity left. You can fine a ghost $50,000 all you want. If the owner is broke and gone, the public still pays to remove the boat, and the fine is just a number on a page. And there's a darker wrinkle. Owners who refuse to pay can be blocked from buying another boat or even registering a vehicle, but you can't squeeze a payment out of someone who has nothing left. The penalty looks tough. The water still fills up. There is, though, one part of this story that actually helps you, and it's the practical takeaway most owners never hear about. Several states now run turn-in programs. In Florida, it's called the Vessel Turn-in Program. If your boat is at risk of becoming derelict and you genuinely can't afford to keep it or remove it, you can voluntarily surrender it to the state, and it gets removed and destroyed at no cost to you. No $50,000 fine, no felony charge waiting down the road. You hand over the title, the headache is gone, and you've stayed on the right side of the law. It's not glamorous, but for an owner trapped underwater on a boat they can't sell, it is the single smartest exit on the table. Most people don't know it exists, which is exactly why they end up sinking the boat in a back bay and praying nobody traces it to them. So let's bring this all the way back to you, because this entire story comes down to which of three people you are right now. If you already own a boat, understand what these numbers are telling you. The wave of abandonment is a flashing sign that used values are soft and the cost of holding is high. Don't panic sell into a flooded market, but don't keep pouring money into a boat you've stopped using either. Know your real number, what it's worth today versus what you owe, and if that gap is brutal, look at the turn-in program before you look at the bottom of a channel. And run the honest math on disposal too, because at $400 to $800 a foot, scrapping even a mid-sized boat the legal way can cost more than the boat is worth. That gap between what it costs to leave it and what it costs to deal with it is the exact gap that's filling the waterways. Don't let yourself become a statistic in it. If you're a shopper, this is the best news you've heard all video. A flood of distressed and repossessed boats means the buyer holds the leverage for the first time in years. You do not need to chase. You set the price. You wait for the seller who has to move it, not the one who wants to. The person who waits is the person who wins. And when you do find one, factor in everything the seller is desperate to forget: the slip fees, the storage, the service, the eventual disposal cost. Price all of it in, and you'll see why a $40,000 boat is sometimes still too expensive. And if you're the seller stuck in the middle, the honest move is to price for today's market, not the boom you bought into. The boat that sits unsold is the boat that becomes the next tombstone in a marina. Better a hard number now than a derelict bill later. That's the whole machine. A boom that borrowed buyers from the future, a depreciation trap that left owners underwater, a cold calculation that made walking away cheaper than holding on, and a public left to drag the wreckage out of the water at $400 a foot. The boats clogging American waterways aren't an accident or a run of bad luck. They're the receipt for a market that got ahead of itself, and the receipt always lands on the same desk, yours. You came here worried about a boat. You're leaving understanding a machine. And the next time someone tells you a boat is a safe place to park your money, you'll know exactly what's drifting half-sunk in a channel a few miles away and exactly who's paying to haul it out. So here's the only thing left to decide. Are you going to be the owner who gets caught when the tide goes out, or the buyer who's standing on the dock with cash when everyone else is desperate to get rid of theirs? Subscribe, and I'll show you exactly what to watch for and when the smart money moves. The signal's coming. Make sure you're on the right side of it.